Welcome to another episode of Ex-Vicarious. I'm Braith, and today I'm joined by Isaac Peiris. I first came across Isaac when he posted about returning from a LinkedIn break and how it was worth it, even if the algorithm was going to penalize him for inactivity. Since then, he's actually become a LinkedIn top voice, and I've been enjoying my dose of growth marketing and branding strategy from Isaac every week since. Some of my favorites were how Decathlon capitalized off a nationwide power outage and how IKEA opened a virtual store on Roblox that they're actually paying people to work at. Isaac has recently started his own consultancy to help businesses grow, and this comes after spearheading growth for Badia, Mamamia, the Daily Aus, and Clipboard. Alright, so I spent a lot of sleepless nights thinking, how do I become the best version of myself and leave my mark on the world? To answer this, I decided to ask exceptional people who have or are on the journey of doing just that. When you have big dreams, it's easy to just fantasize about them and live vicariously through your idols. But that's not how I want to live. So if you feel the same way, this podcast will show you how to make your dreams look more like goals by showing you how founders, creators, and game changers did it. You'll learn about their habits, mindsets, and strategies so you can stop dreaming and start dream making. I'm Braith, and this is ex-vicarious. Isaac, thanks for taking the time to be here today. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good, mate. Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so before we get to the questions, I just wanted to ask, was there anything else you'd like to tell the audiences about yourself or the journey you've taken to be where you are today?
I think you covered it pretty well. It's always funny hearing someone talk about the kind of career journey. It makes it sound almost planned a little bit, but I can guarantee you it definitely has not been. It's just been all about jumping onto opportunities that have come up, and I've been incredibly fortunate to have some awesome opportunities. But
Yeah, definitely excited to see each one as we go through them today. But just to start off, I wanted to ask, where did your passion for growing companies start?
yeah, it's really interesting. I almost wouldn't say it started as a passion for growing companies. I think I'm normally just quite interested in how businesses work and particularly in engaging with customers and users. I actually started more on the product management side of things. And there's obviously a really big focus in that industry on user experience, understanding user pain points and all of that. And then coming over to the media side, there's a really big focus on understanding audience, and the parallels between those two are really fascinating to me. So then when it comes down to testing messaging or campaigns with that audience and figuring out what impact you can see that have, I really just fell in love with that process of trying new things and seeing what works, all coming from a place of understanding customer.
Yeah, so when we were talking about these audiences that I guess you like to connect with, which ones near the start of your career were you most interested in creating some type of content to really connect with them, or whether it's, yeah, any types of content or just any way you try to communicate a product or service to them?
Yeah, audience of young people is really fascinating, and that's definitely where I've spent a lot of my career. I think part of that interest came from just being a young person and
Yeah.
feeling like brands really don't understand how to talk to me, and then seeing other businesses out there do it well and being quite fascinated in how they do that. So I started like early in my career, I was actually working at a charity called Batia. It's a youth mental health charity.
Right.
And so their whole business is understanding and helping young people share their experience with mental ill health, which is so powerful, the storytelling behind that, and just being able to see the connections that can create between young people. And then obviously later in my career, moving into the Daily Aus, news for young people, taking this topic of political news and hard journalism, which a lot of companies would tell you young people don't care about,
Hmm.
and communicating in a way that young people really engage with, more than so many other things, was just incredible. So yeah, I guess it came from this point of being a young person that felt a little bit misunderstood, and then seeing businesses actually connect really well with young people and how rare that was, and starting to understand why and how they did that.
Yeah, I know you can't pinpoint it with just one example, but would there be a certain thing that stood out to you where you're like, these sort of brands, when they're trying to bring something to me, let's use the example of news, right?
Mm.
Like some of these other brands or companies where they were trying to communicate news to younger people that you really felt like, okay, this really isn't working? Was there any point in time you can remember where there was something that came across that way and you're like, okay, if we only just changed this, or we use this sort of wording or that sort of strategy?
Mm.
Are there any of those examples you can think of?
Can't think of like a specific example, but I think the common theme through all of it was always about the way that the relationship is framed. I think so many
Right.
businesses run by people who are not young people. It comes across as almost like a lecture or telling young people what they should care about or what they should
Yeah.
do. Whereas the businesses that get it right connect on a peer-to-peer level. Like we get you where because we are young people or we understand you, and we're not going to treat you as people that are inexperienced or don't understand things. The businesses that cut through with young people are the ones that treat them as the intelligent and very
Mm,
multifaceted people that they are. I mean, if the businesses that try and put young people into a single bucket, it's all they all just scroll TikTok and vape. Like they're the ones that don't land with them, right? Because
yeah.
more than ever, people can smell an ad from a mile away, and they can smell the what a business is trying to get them to do through certain messaging. They just see through things so much clearer than previous generations. And so
Yeah.
authenticity and peer-to-peer voice is the only way to get things done.
Yeah. So would you say that's something unique our generation now and how older generations think they should be communicating to us? Or do you think if we go back all these different generations, it's always like the generation beforehand is always thinking that the younger generation won't understand? Or do you think there is some level of larger disconnect, as you mentioned, stuff like TikTok and social media where attention spans are just changing so quickly? Do you think there is difference if we look at it that way?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that there has always been some kind of gap generation to generation because of the experiences of one generation to the next being different. But it's no secret that the generational divide is bigger than ever now. And
Mm,
I think it comes down to just the pace of culture and the way things move so quickly. The experiences of young people today are so vastly different, even to just people 10 years older than them, let alone a whole generation older. I'm technically on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z. And
right.
I look at so much in Gen Z culture today and I'm like, I don't identify with that. I don't get it. But
Yeah.
at the same time, like you could
Yeah.
say the same with for a lot of millennial culture. So I think that
Mm,
the time span is just shorter now for all of these changes that happen. And that makes things really difficult because one generation to the next, you can't fully understand. And the gaps in feeling understood lead to a lot of tension.
yeah. Yeah. 100% a lot of tension. And I think that's what makes it so interesting what you do with bridging that gap in all these different roles that you've had. I wanted to ask about your studying design thinking in university. So, has that influenced your career path at all?
For sure. That's where I started out. And like I didn't really think much of it at the time. It was just something that I was learning at university. And so I thought, this is just the way the world works. Everyone knows this stuff, and I'm just learning it for the first time. But it was really fascinating going out into the workforce and realizing that this was actually something that a lot of places were only just learning about at the same time that I was learning about it in uni.
Yeah.
And that was quite surprising to me. It was one of those things, if your only experience is with startups and everyone just gets stuff done, when you go into a bigger business,
Mm,
you almost can't understand how it doesn't run like that and vice versa.
right.
And so I think with design thinking for me, it just seemed obvious because that was the way that I learned to do things. That was the way that I learned to think at university. And I was very fortunate to have a degree that was very progressive and forward thinking and taught that kind of. And it definitely steered the career path for me because I wanted to be in places that got it and that allowed me to work in that way.
Yeah. So for people who don't know what design thinking is, could you just delve into it a little bit of a crash course, and just explain how it's helped you think differently about growth and how you've approached different situations in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot more widespread these days, which is fantastic.
Mm,
I think the way that I think about it, back to the double diamond framework, which is something that a lot of people have probably seen by this point, but you when you're faced with a challenge or a particular problem space, instead of diving straight into solutions, you take that step back and spend most of your time understanding the problem itself. And there's a lot of exercises you
Mm.
can do. And the first part of that diamond is going really wide, doing a lot of exploration and research and discovery on trying to understand the specifics of the problem. Because if you're coming up with a solution to what is essentially a symptom of the problem, you'll never solve the core problem itself. So you start by going really wide. That's the first part of the first diamond, doing a lot of research and discovery. And then you converge and you refine that into unique insight that gives you a better understanding of the core element of the problems. And from that point, you dive into solutions where, again, you go wide. That's where there's all kind of brainstorming activities, Post-it notes and all that kind of fun stuff you can do in workshops. Go really wide and come up with solutions that might not be feasible, might not make a lot of sense, might seem a bit weird, but they give you some insight into thinking about the problem a bit differently. And then again, you converge and you refine those into something that is feasible and deliverable. And that gives you some kind of outcome to take forward.
Yeah, and I've found with that sort of approach, it allows you to be very creative and open minded. So, would you say that you've always felt you've been a creative person beforehand, or by going through that sort of process, learning that those sort of ways of thinking, it made you more creative? Which way would you say is more accurate?
I would say it's actually redefined my definition of creativity. Because I think
Right.
coming out of school, and I assume a lot of people are like this, creativity as artistic ability. That is the definition of creativity. It's people that do visual arts or can draw or all that kind of stuff. But I think coming into design thinking and looking at how that is applied in a business capacity, I started to understand that creativity was more of a open-mindedness and a way of
Mm.
thinking in approaching problems. Creativity is just thinking of something new. It doesn't have to necessarily mean design creativity.
Yeah.
It can just be a way of approaching problems. So it definitely redefined how I thought about creativity by applying that design thinking.
Yeah, that's really cool. I wanted to ask about Concio Group. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so I noticed you co-founded it while you're still in uni. So yeah, could you just describe what you did at Concio Group and how it came about?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to what I was saying before. I was learning about these design thinking principles with some of my peers, other students. And as we started to go out and do our first internships and get a glimpse at the workforce, we realized that there was a lot of businesses out there that weren't operating like that
Mm.
didn't know those things. And we were really surprised. We assumed that's just the way the world worked. And we were
Yeah.
learning it at uni, but businesses were only discovering this about the same time.
Mm.
And so we almost just through a bit of fun created this agency, a group of four of us, and we went and ran workshops with other companies,
Mm.
basically running them through the design thinking process. So we'd get a very specific problem space of theirs, and we'd just walk them through the design thinking process over a kind of half day session. And it was fantastic. Like we were just applying what we were learning at uni in real time
Yeah.
and earning money from it, which was pretty incredible. And it was a lot of fun to see that real world application pretty immediately and to have the feedback from those companies. It was valuable for them. It was a pretty surprising and exciting thing at the time as well.
Yeah, so I imagine being a uni student and teaching these big companies where like the people you're teaching probably a lot older as well. What sort of gave you guys the confidence to do that and how did you reach out to them?
Yeah, I think the confidence is a really good question because that was definitely something that we struggled with is we were learning these things and we had the signals from places we were interning at or from other businesses that that was something that was of value to them. But there was
Mm.
still that imposter syndrome of, yeah, like, I'm a uni student. What do I have to teach these other businesses? I think something that helped with that, the degree that we were doing was very much structured around engaging with real world clients. So the way that it worked was every semester, a new company would come in and give us a brief, and our
Right.
project for that semester was to pitch that company our solution. So we were quite used to, as uni students, being in rooms where we were telling people who were older than us in real businesses what we
Yeah.
thought they should do to solve their problems. So that absolutely helped. And then in terms of the businesses that we worked with, it was actually something that has really helped me on my career, seeing that these principles, something that's so valuable about them is how broadly applicable they are. So we worked with a medical research group at Sydney Uni, figuring out what their next project should be. We
Yeah.
worked with an international hospitality company, helping them redefine organizational structures in their hotels. And it was the same design thinking process that we applied to both those situations, but it's obviously vastly different spaces that they operate.
Yeah.
And that was something that was very exciting for me because I think I've never really known what my career path would be. I've always just been open to opportunity. And
Yeah.
so finding this way of working that was valuable across multiple industries, I saw that as something that was incredibly valuable for me and to the people I was working with at Concio Group to help push us forward in our careers. It was going to be something that was applicable no matter where we.
Yeah, yeah, that's really awesome. So I also noticed that you were the second hire into Badia's marketing team, first employee ever for Clipboard, and first marketing growth and brand hire for the Daily Aus. So what's drawn you towards these companies in the early stages, and what do you think has helped you land roles to work directly with the founding team a lot of the time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I've always been attracted to the idea of having impact. I
Mm,
like to be able to come in and help a business to do things a little bit differently or introduce some new perspective.
yeah.
I don't particularly enjoy the maintenance phase of running a business. I'm
Mm,
excited by new opportunities and change and driving growth. So that's what's really drawn me to those earlier roles is being able to drive that impact from the beginning or close to the beginning. In terms of the businesses themselves and what's drawn me to them at their stage, I've really only recently reflecting on this identified what it was, but
mm,
it's finding these businesses that have achieved a level of product market fit. The founders have come in with some kind of hypothesis, some idea, and they've been able to prove that is true. The Daily Aus is a great example. Sam and Zara, incredible founders. Can we deliver news, hard news, to young people on social media?
yeah.
And they found that you absolutely can. By the time I joined, they had 400,000 Instagram followers. It was absolutely flying. But in every one of those businesses that I've been at, after you have that initial product market fit, you've proven the original hypothesis. There's essentially this question of, okay, now what? What's next? We proved what we set out to prove. Where do we go from here? And
Mm,
I think that's the challenge that really excites me is we've proven some product market fit. We have some equity in this space. We have something here. Where do we take it? That's the question that I really enjoy working on. It's something that I've been fortunate enough to have positions where I've been able to do that.
yeah. So if we continue that example with the Daily Oz,
Mhm.
when you did go into there and you were confronted with that question, okay, now where do we take it? Could you walk us through the process that you went through, what you were thinking, or different things you did to find out, okay, this is where I want to direct us and the journey that followed?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember coming in very early on, having a conversation with Sam, one of the co-founders, and saying, you guys are already at 400,000 Instagram followers. You're clearly growing fine. What do you want me to focus on? What is the purpose here? And we had a conversation about how they were growing and what the future of that business looks like. And basically, I think that there's multiple types of growth. We talked about there's the short-term sugar hit growth,
Mm,
where you can do something like a giveaway or a campaign or something, and it will drive a spike of growth, and you know that'll work, and that's fantastic. But then tomorrow, you're back to square one. That spike
mm,
happens, and then it ends, and then you're back to square one. And it's important to do those things. Those things are really good for driving big amounts of growth, but
yeah,
it's effort that you have to put in and consciously decide every day, okay, we're going to do this thing, and it doesn't compound.
right, yeah,
And so for the Daily Aus specifically, they had a lot of success with things like giveaways, and the growth was also tied to the news cycle. Like there was a big piece of news that happened, Daily Aus would post about it, and then that would be shared and they would grow. The challenge with that is that's completely out of their control. They would grow not because of anything they specifically did, but because there was a big piece of news and they couldn't control whether there was going to be news on. So coming in, a lot of the focus was how can we gain more control over our growth journey, and B, do things that are going to compound over time so that we have this kind of growth engine that is just running. Every time we're producing
Yeah.
content, there's just always something happening that is helping us to grow. And obviously the big focus in terms of channel growth was got the Instagram, but it did people off that platform and into newsletter, podcast, and other channels in more of a content ecosystem. The subtitle that we came up with for the strategy for the year was from an Instagram page to a media company. I think that really reflected how we thought about it internally. Was we want to be bigger than just Instagram, and we want to be established as a media company. That's how we wanted the audience to see us, as more than just an Instagram page, as a reputable media business across multiple channels, and also the industry more broadly. I think when you're a bunch of young people in a room running a media business, the rest of the industry can see you as the kids with the Instagram page. And a big part of it was about being taken more seriously by the rest of the industry.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome to hear. In your own four walls, that was the line that you all followed, and that's eventually what happened. So yeah, that's awesome to see. I also wanted to ask about how you interned at KPMG, right? So obviously that would be quite different, I imagine, to all the startup experiences. So yeah, what was the sort of approach there? Was it early on in your career you just wanted to experience like a lot of different spectrums? And I guess by having both of those experiences, how did it help you pinpoint where you wanted to go with your career?
Yeah, it was towards the end of university when I did the internship, and I just saw so many of my friends and people I was at uni with were going into these grad programs. And that was
Yeah.
just the thing everyone was doing. And I had a bit of a gut feeling that maybe that wasn't for me because I really enjoyed having impact. And I knew that going into a really big company, I would have less opportunity to have outsized impact on the business. But I had the opportunity to do an internship, and I said, I want to try it for myself and just make sure. It would be foolish of me to not at least give it a go. And I had the opportunity to do that. And honestly, it was a fantastic experience. I was incredibly fortunate to work with, at the time, they had a partner for design thinking. His name's Nathan Baird. He's written a book about design thinking. He has his own agency that runs design thinking workshops. He's an incredibly experienced expert in the design thinking space. And so to be able to work directly with him and learn from him was fantastic. But at the same time, I did prove myself right in a lot of ways. I found that bigger consulting business was not the environment for me. As much as I enjoyed the type of work and the concept of working across a lot of industries and all of that, I could tell that working in startups and smaller businesses on more specific challenges was probably where I was going to enjoy myself more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just by applying to all these different roles early on in your career and being able to help so many different companies, what would you say has helped you most to land roles? So for like other younger people out there, whether they're in uni right now or they've just finished, like what would you suggest to them that's helped you personally?
It's a good question because it's tough. It is tough. And especially if you don't know what you want to do, which I don't think I ever really have. I think my whole career has just been about seeing an opportunity come up and going for it. I would say when it comes to applying for roles, it's all about making sure you're specific in what you're applying for. I've had periods of time where I just apply to a whole bunch of roles and I don't get any of them because I'm just sending out the same resume, the same cover letter, whatever. And it's just, it's the same across everything. I'm not particularly invested in any of the jobs I'm applying for and it just doesn't work out. But then when there's an opportunity that comes up and I see it, I really think about it. I'm like, really want that. Like that really resonates with me. You put in that extra effort to tailor things a little bit and you really almost like present how you can understand their business and help more specifically than just what the role responsibilities are, they're generally the ones that will come off more often
Mm.
because it feels like a more one-to-one connection. And again, I think it's totally different when you're applying for startups and smaller businesses. It's so much more about the personality fit and culture add.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to come in and help as an individual? Whereas I think when you're applying to a really big company, it's just we need someone to fill this exact role. But yeah, I would say all the roles that I've applied for and gotten have been much more about connecting personally with the people at the business and understanding the challenges they were facing and being able to link that back to expertise of mine, even if it's across a completely different industry. Like when I took the
Yeah.
job at Mamamia, I had never worked in the media industry before, ever. But
Yeah.
what they were working on was a subscription offering, and they were launching a subscription. And so they were treading into a new space as well. And
Mm.
so I just connected that to my experience in startups and user growth that I'd done at the SaaS business and looked at the principles that applied in SaaS platform growth and kind of connected that with subscription growth because ultimately you're growing users on both ends. So you just try to, yeah, I guess identify the elements of the role, even if it is in a completely different industry, identify
Yeah.
elements that connect with some kind of experience that you have and show how that can help solve the problem.
Yeah, so when you talk about connecting with the company and the people there and the problems they're trying to solve, was it more so doing your own research, just looking at what they're trying to do and potentially the competitors they may have and ways they can succeed? Or was the focus more on actually reaching out to whoever the founders are or people in the team and building relationships with them?
Yeah, it's been different for each of the roles that I've had, if I'm honest. I think
Right.
the Mamma Mia one was probably the main role where I literally just applied for the job on LinkedIn and went through the process. I didn't know anyone there, didn't have any
Right.
insight, and went through that. I think that one was about understanding where they were at as a business. Like anytime someone's hiring a new role, it's a pretty solid amount of investment into bringing someone onto the team. And that's because
Mm.
they're having some kind of challenge or there's some kind of opportunity that they want to dive into. So understanding why they're hiring that role and what they're hoping to get out of it is really valuable. But a lot of the other roles that I've had, Daily Aus is a great example. I saw Sam, the co-founder, put the role, like post on LinkedIn with the role. I've been following Sam on LinkedIn just because I knew of the Daily Aus and they were doing some cool stuff in the
Yeah.
space. He put the role up and I remember thinking about it and I was like, "Oh, I wonder if that's the right thing." And I went away for the weekend on a family trip and I came back uh, and I had decided over the weekend, you know what, I'm going to apply. And I got back from
Mm.
the weekend and I looked up and the role had closed. And it was at that moment I was like, oh man, I really wanted this role. It's only when it's gone,
Mm.
I actually
Yeah.
didn't realize how much I want it. And so I just messaged Sam. I was like, hey man, I saw the role was closed. No pressure if you've already found someone, but thought about it over the weekend and I'd be keen to throw my hat in the ring. And like less than half an hour later, he messaged me back, let's grab coffee. And I think it was pretty much less than 2 weeks. And the deal was, it was just one of those ones where, yeah, there was that connection pretty quickly in
Mm.
understanding the challenges they were facing and where I could fit into that. And so that's, yeah, one of those that you follow on what people are doing and be aware of what's going on in the industry. And then when a cool opportunity comes up, just throw your hat in the ring and go for it.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool to hear, especially any of the younger audiences who are applying to different roles, knowing that landing a job is never just like one certain strategy. As you said, like all these different roles, it's always just been different things for
Mm.
you. And yeah, it's really cool to hear. Now, I wanted to ask about the earliest dream you remember having. So it could have been when you were just a child that stayed with you to this day.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think that I've had solid dream that has really stuck with me in terms of where I want to go in life. Like for myself, my
Mm.
career journey has been all over different industries and really about not being too planned and just taking opportunities as they come and continuing to do things that are interesting and
Yeah.
spending time in interesting places and meeting interesting people. That's really been at the focus. It's not been about having a dream and really going after that. I've had
Mm.
friends that have had that experience and they've just known this is what I'm going to do and they go and do it. And that's incredible. But that kind of hasn't been the case for me. I think for me, in terms of my dream, where I want to be in my life, it has been much more about what happens outside of work. Honestly, it's about family, like safety and like relationships with
Mm.
people and friends. That's what the earliest dream I can think of has been about.
Yeah, I guess when I ask this, a lot of the time, it's not just career
Mm,
wise, right? Whatever matters to you most doesn't have to be what you're working on in terms of work. So, yeah, I did want to delve into that a little bit when you mentioned like the relationships you have with your family and the people closest to you and
yeah.
safety. Like, what does the ideal life look like when it comes to those sort of bonds? And is it something that you're striving for in the future, or is it something that you feel like at this point you're already reaching there and it's just about maintaining it?
I think the funny thing with dreams is often it's never really an end point. Like anytime
Mm,
you get to somewhere, there's a new dream of somewhere else you want to get to. It's the goalpost is always moving in a lot of ways. I think
yeah.
that's been a really big learning for me is to take the time to stop and think about the fact that a couple of years ago, I was probably dreaming about being exactly where I am. And
Mm,
although I now have new dreams and ambitions for where I'm going to go into the future, I've also come a long way. And I think that is something to be appreciative of. When it comes to relationships with people, I would say that's something that's always evolving. It's never a maintenance phase thing. It's always
mm,
evolving. And ultimately, relationships with people, it's the most important thing in life. There's no other reason to do anything really besides connecting with
yeah.
other people. And I often think about further on in life, why will I have done all the things that I've done? What's the outcome at the end of the day? And
Yeah.
it's about the friendships that you make, the connections with family, and the people that are around you that you meet along the way that are ultimately the most important.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And I noticed that you said recently is when you started realizing you got to take that step back and appreciate how
Mm.
you've reached certain goals or certain dreams you had a couple years ago. What do you think in the past has prevented you from really, being in the present and appreciating what you have? Are there certain things that
Mm.
prevented you from realizing that?
Yeah, for sure. There's a very natural competitive element to it. I think it's really easy to look across at people you were at school or uni with who are doing all kinds of amazing things
Yeah.
and go, oh, I should be there. There's no reason why I shouldn't
Mm,
be at that level. And so you just end up on this constant hamster wheel of just running faster and faster.
yeah.
And it's interesting. I feel like, yeah, again, recently, a lot of people that especially that I was at uni with, have hit this point of maybe everything's not quite what it cracked up to be. Like people going into these big organizations or pouring all their time and effort into climbing the career ladder, as you do when you leave uni, as everyone does. After a few years, you get to this point of actually, what's it all for? Like, I'd rather do something that I enjoy doing every day or have enough balance to go and spend time with friends and family. Yeah. So it's forced that reflection point, especially as I'm now working on my own business.
Yeah.
Like, that's the ultimate question of why am I doing what I'm doing?
Mm,
And it's only really through that I've reflected on really just trying to look internally and being grateful for the opportunities that I've had and how far I've come rather than comparing myself to people that I know or other people around me because it's so easy to do, especially on LinkedIn
mm,
and social
100%.
media. Like anyone's only ever posting the good stuff.
Mm,
And it's so easy to just see people kicking goals left, right, and center and take that as a kind of marker that you're not doing as well.
yeah.
I think the really beautiful thing is when you make friends with those people, as I've been fortunate enough to do, make friends with people through LinkedIn who are doing awesome stuff. You actually just end up being a really supportive community. Like you
Yeah.
see someone do something really well and you're like, that's awesome. Go you. And you can be really happy for them without it being an indicator on you not doing as well. That's a really important mindset shift.
Yeah, actually, that I never thought about it that way, but now that you mention it, like a lot of the people that I have met on LinkedIn, some of them even coming onto the podcast as well, and as you become closer and develop a more personal relationship rather than just seeing each other's posts, yeah, your mindset's really about, yeah, I want this person to do well, and you're happy to see them succeed, and yeah, you don't even think about competition at all. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that. I never thought about it that way. Previously, you mentioned how dreams and goals is something that the goalposts keep moving, right? It's like you achieve something and it keeps going forward, and you always have something new to strive for. And then more recently, by having that mindset to really appreciate what you have and what you have achieved and get off that hamster wheel of comparison, you're able to just be happier and be more fulfilled. In terms of continuing to reach those new goals, where you have this one side of you that stays ambitious, the goalposts keep moving, but this other side where you're like, I really appreciate where I've gotten to. How do you think those sort of ways of thinking can interact with each other to continue to make you successful and continue to hit your goals? And would you say that at different points of your career, it's better to lean more on one side, like competitive nature versus being appreciative of what you have? Or do you think that there is that clear nexus where you can be appreciative, you can be ambitious, and that's the best way moving forward? It's sort of a long winded question, but
No, it's a fantastic question. Honestly, it's something that I've really struggled with
yeah.
throughout my career. It's so tough because a lot of people intrinsically have this ambition to go do big things, right?
Mm,
I think even coming back to the generational thing, as a generation, as kids, you're always told like you're going to go on to do great things or you're achieving well. And so it builds up this level of expectation that you will continue to exceed expectation,
yeah.
which is just a never ending loop, which is really challenging. So the way I think about it, and I by no means have perfected this. This is something that I still struggle with daily. But the way that I try to think about it is you always want to have some big goal, vision, or some big thing that you're working towards. I personally find that a really big motivator. Doesn't work for everyone, but I find that exciting, having some bigger thing that I'm working towards.
Mm,
Your happiness can't be tied to achieving that thing.
right.
You have to be able to have something that you're working towards, but have happiness and joy come from being excited about being on the journey.
Mm,
And I think that's the way that I try to think about it, because if you put yourself through dissatisfaction and you don't enjoy the work, by the time you achieve the big thing, if you achieve the big thing, you're left a little bit empty. It's not,
mm,
no one has ever worked really hard towards some huge goal, gotten there, and then gone, sweet, now I'm happy, content, best I've ever been, and I can chill out. Like it is that hamster wheel analogy of you just keep running. So I think you, yeah, it's motivating for me to have a bigger, ambitious goal to work towards, which I find really exciting and energizing. But that's big and broad and long term.
mm.
When you look at the shorter term, just day by day, you got to appreciate everything else that's going on and everything outside of work and catching up with friends and doing the fun stuff. That's ultimately that's what really matters, whether you get to that big goal or not.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And in terms of the big goals, like by having your own consultancy now, what would you say is most fulfilling about it?
I really enjoy being able to work with all kinds of businesses. I think like I mentioned before, I've really enjoyed finding businesses that are at that point of now what, where we go from here. And so
Mm,
working on a more consulting and freelance type model, I get to work with a number of businesses that are at that point and help them push past it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely worth mentioning that didn't necessarily intend to go down this path. I remember I finished up at the Daily Aus on earlier this year on a Friday. My partner and I moved into a new apartment together on the Saturday. Right. And then Monday morning, she went off to work and I just sat down on the couch surrounded by all these cardboard boxes, fully unemployed. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, where am I going?
Yeah.
I was so unsure. And I met with a whole bunch of people, which was really fantastic. And they were talking about challenges they were facing that didn't necessarily need a full-time employee, but were things that I felt like I could help with.
Yeah. So
I originally just took on some of that work to buy myself some time to find another job that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I was quite fortunate through LinkedIn and through networks and talking to lots of people that those requests for work kept coming in. And so I just kept taking them and going with it. And it really just evolved from there. It was never at the outset my intention to go into this type of thing. It was just a for now type of idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the point at which you realized, okay, this is something I can actually be doing full time? And how did you approach it? Did you have certain ideas about the structure you wanted to work at? Like, is there certain hours of the day that you're like, I can start to commit to this, and moving forward, these are my goals with the consultancy? How did it come about and become cemented?
Yeah, I went away with my partner we did a trip to South America for 5 or 6 weeks. It was beautiful. And that was just after I'd left the Daily Aus as well. And so I think while I was on that trip, I obviously did a lot of thinking about what I wanted to do when I came back. And I realized that I actually had really enjoyed the project-based work, and it was coming in. I wasn't doing any cold emailing or any of that. Mm-hmm. People were messaging me, which is an incredibly fortunate position to be in. I decided at that point that I would just at least lean into it a little bit and see what came of it. And then it was really by connecting with other awesome people who are doing their own businesses and hearing their stories and understanding what they're working towards that I realized what kind of model this could take, which is something that I'm still figuring out. I'll be completely honest. I'm definitely not there yet, but working with people like Tom, who runs Strategy Breakdowns, the newsletter, it was full-time at Atlassian, was writing on LinkedIn, started this newsletter, and then has gone full-time on that at kind of earlier this year. So chatting with people like that and sharing about what they're working towards, it has helped me start to shape up, maybe this is something that I could do. And I think also not having the full-time job, like this is just the work that I'm doing. There's obviously a financial element to it of I need to go out there and just do some work and figure it out by doing, rather than spending too much time thinking about positioning or what the messaging and this and that. I actually just need to go and do some work, which is quite a motivating factor for sure.
Yeah, shout out Tom as well. I'll put that in the show notes for people to find. Yeah, in terms of your goals, I guess maybe for the next year moving forward, I know you said you haven't thought too much about the positioning. It's just more helping these people out straight away. Are there certain goals you have for, let's say in a year's time, where you want to be taking this? Is there anything in mind for you right now?
Yeah, I'd love to explore what this looks like slightly scaled up as more of an agency, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I brought on my first employee. So there's 2 of us in the business now, which is super exciting.
Oh, nice. Congrats.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Such a weird and wonderful opportunity to do that. But that has been super, super exciting. And I would like to continue looking at opportunities like that to scale this up. I think with this consulting freelance type work, it is ultimately tied to my time. And so there's only so far that can go. But what I'm really fascinated by at the moment is this intersection of media and tech. You're just seeing media companies who have owned attention and audiences for so long start to realize that business models are shifting and they need to find new ways of working. And some of the really clever ones are generating their own paid offerings, their own paid products, and then just channeling the attention and the brand trust that they already have into those products. And then similarly, on the other end of things, you've got product companies who have users and are trying to compete for attention, move more upstream and start to develop their own media assets to compete for attention directly. Biggest example probably being HubSpot acquiring The Hustle for over 20 million
Yeah.
US back in 2021. And so now there's a HubSpot podcast network
Mm.
and the whole suite of newsletters. And so that's the intersection that I'm really fascinated in at the moment with my background in product management and on the media side of things.
Yeah.
So I'm really keen to start building out more of an agency in that space. I've already been doing a lot of one-to-one consulting with businesses, both on the tech side and the media side on those kind of challenges.
Yeah.
My idea would be to scale that up a bit more.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome and really excited for that. Are there any media agencies that come to mind when you think of the most surprising one that's come up with a product, like one that is very unexpected? Do any come to mind?
Well, I'd like maybe not the best example because it's the one that I worked on, but I'm super fascinated by what we were able to do at Mamamia.
Hmm.
So they obviously have their subscription product, which content subscription, which can be a tough business to be in, asking people to pay for content.
Yeah,
And we had some audience insights, which again, media companies are so connected to what their audience needs are. They actually have such an unfair advantage when it comes to like identifying product opportunities.
yeah,
We found that the fitness app space was something that, even though it was a very crowded space, our audience didn't feel they were being served by existing players in that space.
yeah,
And so we did obviously a bunch more research on exactly what that could look like and ended up building a fitness app, like a home workout platform called Move by Mamamia,
yeah,
and bundling that into the subscription. So this media company launched a fitness app, which at the outset might not make sense on paper, but I think it's those kind of moves that are really clever because
yeah,
it's taking audience insights that no one else has, you only have because of the media entity, leaning on the brand trust, the fact that audience trusts Mamamia to represent them and to understand their needs.
yeah.
And then launching a product, you're not launching from scratch. You're simply not playing the same game as
Mm,
everyone else. You have such an unfair advantage in that space. And then you already have all of the attention of that audience to just promote your own product. It is a really huge opportunity for other businesses. But
yeah,
products could be anything. Like that's a software example that's quite a big one. You see it so much in the creator economy, people with courses and templates and all kinds of paid products
yeah,
that they capture the attention of an audience group, use that to understand the needs of that group, develop solutions that help solve those challenges, and then just point the people in that direction. It's a pretty simple model when you think about it like that, but it is a super powerful one that a lot of media businesses are only just starting to experiment with.
yeah, yeah. It's really awesome because obviously you already own that audience and already have a tribe or a bunch of fans who really
Mm.
support you. So it's just like extending something further, something a bit more tangible for them to continue to connect with you guys. So I think it's, yeah, super, super interesting space as well. In terms of the LinkedIn posting, I wanted to ask, first of all, how'd you get started with that? And what's your sort of process with it? Do you set out time in your day to research about certain things happening into the space to write about? Or is it more so that you're so deeply entrenched into the space, you just come across this sort of thing, these sort of things that you're like, okay, I want to write about it? Yeah, just how'd you get started and what's your process like with it?
Yeah. It was actually Sam, the co-founder of the Daily Aus, who got me started on it. Can't remember what the context was, but we were talking and I'd been to a couple of events with Sam and Zara and Billy, who was the editor. Now she's now editor in chief.
Yeah.
And the three of them are all known very well in the media industry, founders and the editor of this publication.
Yeah.
I had been a product manager at Mamamia and before that had never been in the media industry. So no one knew who I was. And I'd been along to a few things with like fairly high profile people in their networks.
Mm.
And it was, hey, Sam, hey, Zara, hey, Billy, who are you? And
Yeah.
it was just this feeling of I needed to build profile a little bit.
Mm.
But it was talking with Sam about the work that we were doing at the Daily Aus, which when you're in it, you just see it as this is just work. This is just what I do during the day. It's not that interesting.
Mm.
Sam really encouraged me to just post once a week about what we were working on. But I think one of my first posts was just we were looking at launching a referral program for the newsletter. So I posted about how Morning Brew did the referral program really well, but they did it with
Right.
like logos on t-shirts. And I wasn't really convinced that an Australian audience cared about having a TDA logo on a t-shirt and whether that would be an incentive for them.
Mm.
I just did a post about, here's what we're thinking about, here's what we're saying, what do you think? And that went really well. And I realized, oh, what we're working on is actually interesting to a lot of people. So that's how it started, is I was just posting once a week about what we were working on and things that I was seeing that were interesting. And then when it came to finishing up at the Daily Aus, by that point, I built connections with a lot of people through that content and people had a lot of interest in it. And so I decided to just double down. And that's where pretty much all of the people I've worked with now on the consulting side have been people that message me after I do some kind of post, which has been fantastic.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the process, yeah, it's a bit of a mix. I have, subscriptions to a lot of newsletters and podcasts and articles and all that kind of stuff. So whenever I find something interesting, save it. And then on the weekends, mostly. Now I can do it during the week because I'm doing my own thing. But it used to be on the weekends, I would just sit down for a couple of hours and
Yeah.
just turn those into some kind of post.
Yeah. Okay. For other people interested in the space, what would you recommend as the best like newsletter or podcast?
It's a good question. I think in the media space, Simon Owens is a huge one. He writes incredibly about all things happening in media, has a lot of links in that newsletter to relevant articles and different bits and pieces going on.
Yeah.
And then honestly, it's more the publications that I find do interesting stuff. Ad News or even
Right.
the
Okay.
AR. And there's lots of interesting stories out there that can just be written up in a way that's more readable and accessible on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But then the really interesting stuff sometimes comes from Harvard Business Review piece of research that you can pull some stats from and share and things like that. It's really a process of, as you're consuming content, once you've started posting, you get a bit of a feel for what people are interested in and what could work well. And so you just start saving stuff and then, give yourself some time to sit down and turn those ideas into posts. I always try to edit in a different session. So
Right.
I write a first draft and then put it away, come back the next day and edit just with a clearer mind. It tends to work well. And that's how it works so far. I'm sure there's a better way to do it. I'm sure there is, but that's how I've organically fallen into it.
Yeah, I'll put all of those in the show notes. And would you say that when you are consuming this content, I guess when you're coming across it more organically, do you ever have to stop yourself and be like, I'm just doing too much consuming, not enough like writing? Do you ever have those moments?
Absolutely. And I that's why I try to be more intentional about where I go to find content. So now the process of sourcing content ideas is very detached from just natively like consuming content. That's why
Right.
I often don't find content from other LinkedIn posts.
Yeah.
Try not to just endlessly scroll the LinkedIn feed
Mm.
because it can be really tough. It's more now I have time where I'm going to go and source a bunch of ideas and I go and check all of these websites and see what they've posted and do a process of collection. Or for the newsletters and podcasts, if I see something come in my inbox or I'm listening to something interesting, I just save it in the moment and I've got a shortcut set up. So I just 1 or 2 clicks, save it and then move on. And I know that it's there for later rather than, getting too caught up in the overconsumption of it.
Yeah, this is super cool to hear. Just like being on the outside and seeing all these posts all these time, like seeing how it actually comes about. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that. There is a lot more I want to ask, and potentially might need to do a part two. But I wanted to just jump to being conscious of time. I just wanted to jump to the questions that I ask every guest. So, if you had to live your life following the words of one single quote, what would it be?
Great question. I'm definitely not one to be too philosophical with quotes or anything like that. But one that I came across recently for a post was
Hmm.
Benjamin Franklin, well done is better than well said.
Hmm.
And I really liked that because I think it's something that I've struggled a lot with in my career. When you're doing these creative, high level strategy type roles, it's really easy to stay in strategy and talk about
Yeah.
the potential of how great something could be, because then it's exciting. But as soon as you
Hmm.
start to do the work and try it, it could fail. And that's scary. So that's something that I've really struggled with. But yeah, well done is better than well said, because doing the thing is the only way that it is ever going to have impact. If it stays an idea, it will have zero impact. It's only by trying it that you figure out what it can be. And especially in entrepreneurship, but really in all kinds of work, even a failure is a learning for how to do it or do something else the
Hmm.
next time.
Yeah.
Like it's all actually taking the step forward. If you stay in the talking about it and the strategy space, if you're only there, then you're not taking any steps forward. It can feel like it. It can feel like you're putting together a proposal or whatever, but there's a lot of busy work that can happen before actually taking the step. So that's something that I really try to remind myself.
Yeah, I love that, especially when you said as an idea it's exciting, but when you put it out there, only then does it have impact. So, yeah, completely love that. The final one, if you could reach everyone in the world for 30 seconds, what would you say to them?
It's a big question. Honestly, I think it'd be similar to what we were talking about before. It'd be remembering to get off the hamster wheel every once in a while. It's exciting to have a big goal and ambition to work towards, and I think that's a fantastic thing. But remembering to just slow down, get off the hamster wheel, and acknowledge how far you've come and where you are is a pretty powerful thing. There will never be a point where everything is perfect and everything's great. There's always going to be challenges, but just remembering how far you've come and being grateful for that and acknowledging that and giving yourself the credit for that is super important.
Yeah, okay. As a final thing, I'm still trialing it because getting the order of the guests and interviews. But do you have a question for the next guest?
Question for the next guest.
Yeah.
Yes. How about question for the next guest? I would say it may be a bit of a cop out because it's an obvious question, but or it's a question that's overdone. But I always find it really interesting is on that topic of being appreciative of how far you've come. If you have if you could say something to your younger self, not even necessarily advice or anything, but if you could say something to your younger self, what would that be?
Okay. If you could say something to your younger self, what would that be?
Mm.
Got you. All right. So, yeah, thank you so much. Is there any where you want to direct audiences, ways to find you, connect with you, see your content, and what you've been working on?
Definitely. LinkedIn is the main one. Find me there. Isaac Peiris. Send me a connection request and I'm keen to chat with more of you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for taking the time, Isaac. Really appreciate it.
It's no problems. Thanks for having me.